Okay, so in this video we are going to explore how Workbench as a tool can help us to do these operations. Okay, in order to open a Workbench is basically a website, and if you want to open it up, just go to Google and search with like Workbench. And just type Workbench Salesforce. Okay, once you go to Workbench Salesforce, you'll get in the first link only, you'll get the website link. Just click on this, and this is how the Workbench looks like. You have to select here environment as production. We basically have two different environments when you log into Salesforce. One is production, one is Sandbox. This is a free developer editions we are using. Okay, and this is called production. Why? Because when you log into production, you have to give the URL as login.salesforce.com. Okay, this should be your URL when you are going to log into production org. The moment you log into Sandbox, your URL should be test.salesforce.com. Got it? You get the same screen, but this time you are actually logging to Sandbox. Right now, if you ask me what is a Sandbox, what is production, we have a big session on this in the development part. But let me tell you this: Sandbox is an environment which should be copy of the same environment that your customer will be using. Your customer for whom you are building the org, right? They would be going to login.salesforce.com and accessing the application. But you as an admin can't do the stuff, can't do the development directly in the production. So you need an environment where you as an admin or developer will be logging in and do your stuff. That's nothing but the Sandbox. Got it? Sandbox is just a replica of your production. Every single thing that you have in your production will be there in the Sandbox. Now on top of it, you will build things and then you'll deploy it to production. Got it? So your customer would not be seeing the development errors and all this stuff. They would be using the production. Once you're done with the development in the Sandbox, you'll go and deploy it. That's the story of Sandbox and production. We would be leveraging this a little more when we talk about this something called deployment, right? So basically the one that you're using, the Salesforce edition that you're using is the free developer edition, and we go to login.salesforce.com to log in inside our free developer org. That's why when you go to Workbench, you have to choose the environment as production. Got it? Check this box. Click on this button called login with Salesforce. When you log in with Salesforce, this will ask you to allow. Now, if you see here, this is my username of this particular org. I have logged in here with Rajesh Chatterjee, right, in the same org, and this is my username. Where is that? This is the username. So I just have to give the allow access so that Workbench can connect the data with my Salesforce org. Okay, click on allow. Now the connection has been established. Okay, you as an admin, you can use this very easy way. And if you see here, see, I have logged in here as Rajesh Chatterjee, and that's the org that I have logged in. Once you log in here, okay, you have something called data. Do you see this? Let me just increase the size of it. Check this out. You have the same operation that we have discussed now in the previous video, correct? These operations you can perform here in the Workbench. Okay, first operation is insert. Insert is nothing but import. Second, update, then upsert, then delete. We have another operation called undelete, right? Undelete means, I think you can guess it, right? Things like the records that has been deleted, which is there now in recycle bin, you can now undelete those data. You can now restore those data from the recycle bin back to your Salesforce object. That's called undelete. And then we have something called purge. You know what is purge? Purge basically is the permanent delete. That means the hard delete, right? So if you do purge, that means the data that you are deleting it will not be there in recycle bin. If you use only delete option, then the data that you are deleting, it moves to recycle bin. For 15 days, you can actually recover those data. Alright, so these are the operations that we can perform inside Workbench. One more operation that you don't get to see here is called export. I don't see something called export, right? And we have already discussed there is one more operation called export. And export is I believe that's the frequently used operations in the data loading. We do export the data a lot, right? Sometimes what happened, like I have seen in my previous customers implementation, right, where customer, they have to send the Salesforce data to the non-Salesforce users. See, when somebody wants to see the Salesforce data, that person has to be the Salesforce user. Then only you can log in, right? What if I'm not the Salesforce user, but still I have to see? Then the admin have to export the data and then maybe email it back to the customer. So export is a very frequently used operation that we do. But in Workbench, there is no specific operation called export. I'm going to show you how can you export the data with Workbench with just few clicks. Before that, let me tell you this. Workbench has one more option called SOQL query. Okay, we can do so many things with Workbench. Okay, and you know what, we can actually deploy. I mean, the deployment also can be done through Workbench, the migration, right? So can be a lot of things can be done. I'm not going to discuss all the other stuff here. Just going to talk about the data loading part and the SOQL query part, because this is something which is going to help us in the export part. Okay, what is SOQL query? Salesforce is a database, correct? And because it is a database, if you know PL, SQL, Oracle, or any other database, you can actually write a query. You can write select star from the table, which will help you to fetch the data from the backend, right? If you know SQL, we write select ID, name, first name, last name, salary from employee object. Like the same way inside Salesforce also, you can write queries. But in Salesforce, we call this as SOQL. This means Search Object Query Language. SOQL query. We use the query a lot in the Apex coding, by the way. Whenever you write Apex, we have to use SOQL query a lot. Guess what? The Workbench gives you the authority to write SOQL query and to fetch whatever data that you want to fetch. And for that, you don't have to know what is SOQL query. You just have to do clicks and Workbench will do the magic for you. Let me show you this. Suppose, let me just open the lead object, okay? I think I have a couple of dummy record in the lead object. See, this is yesterday's lead, right? Let me just open all the leads. So we have almost 19 lead records, right? What if I want to fetch the lead where the lead name is test? Okay, where the lead name is test. So how do I write the query? Let me show you this. If you go to Workbench, very simple. You just have to go to queries. I'm just going to connect the dot after we learn SOQL query, because the operation that I'm going to show you is how to export the data. And in order to export the data, you have to know how this SOQL query things works. So let us understand the SOQL query part. After that, we're going to connect the dots. Click the SOQL query part. Once you click on this, you have objects. Select the object. So I'm going to write the query for an object called lead. See how Workbench is helping us not to write the code, but Workbench is taking the effort to write the SOQL query for us. You see here, you can directly write the code. Okay, so let me just write it. Select ID, comma, name from lead. It doesn't matter if you give small capital letter, okay, whatever it is. Click on query. See, it's going to give me the ID and name of all 27 records that I have. You get it? It's very powerful, right? Now, let's say I don't know how to write this. I'm going to remove this. All I need to do is I'm using here Windows system. So just press the control button and keep selecting those fields that you want to put in your SOQL query. So I'm going to select country, I'm going to select email, I'm going to select ID, first name, I'm going to select last name. Let me see the last name here. See, name is first name plus last name, okay? Or let me select name only. Name. See here, I just have pressed the control button and keep selecting the fields, right? And Workbench actually wrote the query for me. Isn't it cool? Select ID, select country, city, email, first name, last name from lead, and I just click on this query button. Now this query gives me a result which says city is this, country is this, and so and so. I have a record named test. I think this is the one, test, first name, last name, name. Okay, do you find the record named test over here? I don't find it. Let me take a name called Peter Parker. So there's a record named Peter Parker. Okay, now let me tell you this. If I ask you to fetch only this record named Peter Parker, don't fetch any other record, then what would be your query? I think if you know SQL, you'd be saying, I'd be writing select this from lead where name is equal to Peter Parker. Yes, that's correct. But guess what? You don't have to type in. You just select this filter result by. Click on this, select name. I just type in, okay, name, select name. You have the same operators, starts with, ends with, contains, and so on. I'm just putting equals to Peter Parker. Very simple. See, it actually gave me the entire query. And if I now click on query button, it gives you only that record name Peter Parker. Super cool. Okay, now I'm going to remove this. I'm going to remove the entire where clause. So ideally it's supposed to give me all the record from leads. I have now only 27 records. What if you want to export this data? Now I'm connecting back with the export operations. I have written the SQL query to fetch the data in the Workbench. Now I want the same thing in an Excel file or CSV file. How can I do it? So for that, I have something called bulk CSV. Do you see this? If you select list, it's just going to show you the result in a list. If you select bulk CSV and then click on query button, this will allow you to download the CSV file. You see this button called download, this button? Yeah, you'll also see the same thing. Okay, just click on this button. You will be able to download the same thing that you have seen in the Workbench. And it is asking me, do you want to open it with Excel? I said, okay, yes. Now this is the data I just have exported. Isn't it cool? Right, same data which was showing me in the Workbench, I just have exported the same data with the help of bulk CSV. Okay, so this is how we can actually export the data from Salesforce to an Excel file with the help of Workbench. I'll just repeat everything that we have done so far. We have learned what is Workbench and what are the operations that Workbench can perform, what is SOQL query, and we have learned how you as an admin, without having an idea what is a SOQL query and how to write it, can write an SOQL query by just pressing the control button and keep selecting the fields over here after selecting the object. Then we have learned how to export the same result in a CSV file by clicking this bulk CSV button and then query. Okay, so we have now done with the export operation. Next video, we're going to talk about import with Workbench.